the term. If you're still working on your exams or have a couple projects left, good luck. You're almost done. So, you're at the end of the road. This week, we have the topic of applying to research opportunities, the nitty-gritty and what not to do. So this will incorporate a couple of things that were presented in workshops prior to this one during fall 2020 and others that will be new. So we hope these will be kind of useful. We got 4 graduate students that are going to be participating. Lolita and I will be leading the discussion today, going over the slides. And we have Annika and Tong joining us. They will be facilitating the FAQ at the end, and they will also answer your questions if any do come up during the talk or the session, I suppose. And so if you do have questions, put them into the chat and they'll try to get to if they can. If not, we'll save it towards the end. Nonetheless, we'll get started. So just a reminder, the Star Scholars Program records all of the sessions. You can find all the sessions for the 2020 workshops on the Psych SAA YouTube. One that might be relevant to what we'll be discussing today that was recorded and put up on there is how to get involved in research. So if this is interesting to you, definitely go ahead and check it out. And the links are available also on the main Star Scholars page as well.
Alrighty, so we do want to give you all a quick update on this recent application cycle for the Star Scholars Program. So at this point, emails to accepted students have been sent out, and we are requesting that we hear responses of yeses or nos by the end of today, December 9th. And so, if that's you, make sure that you go ahead and reply and let us know if you will be joining the program or not, because there are students who are waitlisted and they're going to be hearing, on a rolling basis through this month, whether or not there's space for them to join the program based on how many invited applicants accept or deny. If you applied and you're not accepted, please keep in mind that you're welcome to apply in the future, so long as you're not in your final year of school. And of course, you are in the right place today because you're going to get all the information that you need on how to apply for other research opportunities. Okay, so some objectives for today. So could you go to the first point, Michael? So first of all, we're going to share how to get involved with research in your area. So that could be either in the city where you live or at your university. Second, we're going to share some opportunities specifically that are available here at University of Michigan, but also that are available across the United States. We're going to talk about some different types of RA positions, right? So you've heard this phrase research assistant, but what exactly does that mean? What might that look like? We are going to walk you from, beginning all the way up until the end of the typical process for securing an RA position. And then finally, we are going to share some other useful tips to help you boost your candidacy.
All right, so to start off, since we have a unique palette of students, I guess, that have joined the Star Scholars Program, and we're at different phases in our careers, focused on different topics. So as you can see here, we have Lita, who's part of the social work and the psychology program. Annika is part of the personality social context. I'm in a developmental, and Tong is in the social psychology program. So although we are here at the University of Michigan, we made it to a PhD program, our paths didn't look alike. And so when you're thinking about what do I need to do, how am I going to get there, and you get a little concerned that you may not look like someone else's path, just remember that these things may not always look the same, but you can still get to the same kind of end goal. And so we want to provide you a quick overview of what that might look like through 4 of our own paths. So just to start off, Lolita first started her undergrad research through the Europe program. And she spent 2 years working through Europe. And she joined a gender studies lab, which then led to an honors thesis, a 1-year post-bac RA position. Then she did something that's different than some of us have done. She joined the AmeriCorps and then was involved in youth nonprofits before she joined here at the University of Michigan, focused on intimate partner violence and media effects. Whereas Annika started also to her university equivalent Europe program, and she got involved in a lab at the US University's Business School, which then she followed up by cold emailing different industrial organization psychology companies, which landed her an internship in an industrial organizational psychology company that she was able to do some of this research in. And later on, she was able to find more research positions through University of Psychology Department websites that were able to fill a gap year through multiple RA positions before she joined the University of Michigan this past year, focused in a lab looking at romantic relationships. And then for me, although we didn't have Europe equivalents at community college, I use a similar kind of avenue by researching university web pages for positions at the local medical school. And so through cold emailing, I was able to get involved through a volunteer opportunity, and then considered a work study RA position at a research institute, and then worked with the volunteer department at a local hospital in Portland, Oregon, where I got connected with a neurophysiology lab, applied to a primate center, worked with primates, then applied to work with veterans, before cold email and get involved with the brain imaging lab before I landed at the University of Michigan, focused on brain and rest behavior. And then we have Tong, who also joined the University of Michigan here recently. She, kind of similar to me, she researched labs on the websites, except she focused on psychology and human development, cold emailed a PI, which was for the PhD student, which got her an RA position at a culture and social cognition lab. And then again, she used the cold email process to land herself a summer research opportunity in the Purpose and Identity Process Lab before she became a lab manager at a lab, which eventually then landed her at the University of Michigan. So as you can see through these 4 paths, there are some similarities. Some people cold emailed, which occurred for 3 people. People had Europe equivalents, but the main thing is we all had slightly different variations of our paths, but we all ended up to a goal of a PhD program that we're interested in later on.
Alrighty, so we are going to jump in talking about where you might find some different research opportunities. Okay, so let's start by being very concrete about where exactly research opportunities can be found. And so if you go to the next point, Michael, as you can see, psychology departments are the best place to start when we're thinking about psychology research. But a lot of the topics that are central to psychology are covered in related academic disciplines. So there's a lot of related research in other social sciences. So things like sociology and social work, which is my other academic discipline. And then of course, there are professional schools that do related work. Business school programs, public health schools will do a lot of work that might overlap with psychology. Of course, there are other clinical disciplines, so medical schools, nursing, biology-based programs, and then, of course, this very burgeoning and ever-growing field of looking at different parts of cognition and computational science, computer science, neuroscience, and AI. So keep in mind that you're not just confined to what's available at the psych department at your school. Go to the next point, please. And so outside of academia, research is also performed in both public and private institutions. So now I'm thinking in the realm of government agencies. There are firms and think tanks that are all doing research, a lot of which is covered in typical psychology, psychological research topics. And then when we're thinking about settings, we're not just thinking about, a lab setting that's like for animal research or, beakers and test tubes, right? Which is what a lot of us think of when we hear research. There are all kinds of labs, and a lot of lab settings are just, an office. A lot of our work is just done with different kinds of digital and electronic equipment. And there's no, one type of setting or lab that defines psychology, which is kind of cool. And then there is also a lot of applied work that's done. So these kinds of settings, these lab settings can take places in schools, community-based organizations, hospitals, that includes places like correctional facilities. And so there's such a range of where research is actually performed. And so let's actually think about what kinds of positions would be available to you all as undergraduates who are looking for a research assistant role. And so if you go to the next, so there are some credit-based options, and generally in these kinds of arrangements, you will sort of enroll for a specific course number, but often there isn't actually any sort of set curriculum or specific coursework that's associated with that. It usually is just a way to make sure you get your credit, which will be directly supervised by the lab manager, the faculty member, the graduate student, or whoever's overseeing the project. You can also do work study if that is available to you based on your financial aid package and what's available at your university. It's not just about you having that in your financial aid award, it's also about how are things set up at your university. Other paid opportunities could include something like a stipend or hourly pay. Again, this totally depends. Some people have the funding to be able to pay undergraduate RAs and others do not. So again, it's going to vary a lot case by case. And then there are also some internships that might be available. They might be paid, they might not. Often internships are through sort of a larger program. So, you know, a UROP type placement where you will be considered an intern. And again, whether or not you would be paid, it all just depends. And then finally, there are almost always opportunities to simply volunteer your time in a lab for free, and quite a few undergraduate RA positions will take this form.
And so there are some University of Michigan specific opportunities that students can apply for. And some of these can be also available at universities, but specifically how they're labeled here is University of Michigan offers a UROP program, or the Undergraduate Research Opportunity Program. And this basically is an application format which previous workshop 6, which discussed summer research opportunities, it tries to match you or pair you with a lab that is looking for research assistants on various topics. And so through applying, you can get matched with a lab based on your particular interests, and you can get exposed to different types of research, whether this is working with some forms of data collection, doing some kind of meta-analyses, potentially working with some animal work. It really depends on kind of the lab and what they're specifically looking for. And the UROP program is typically for the academic year, so it's fall through winter. But there's also the summer research opportunity programs, which allow students to work for several weeks over the summer on specific research programs that they can also develop into posters that can expand their expertise in different areas. And there's another program that is offered through the University of Michigan, which is MSpice, which has participating investigators such as Dr. Felix Warneken, Dr. Susan Gelman, and previously Dr. Henry Wellman, where they have basically, it's a cognition early development focus on early childhood kind of processes that are available for students to participate in.
Okay, so, you know, what if you're looking for some research opportunities that are outside of Michigan, the university? Well, you do have quite a few options. So starting us off, if you go to the next point. So there is something called SROP, which is the Summer Research Opportunity Program. So University of Michigan is a participant in this program, but that also means that, you know, we're one of several Big Ten schools, right? And so you can go directly to the national website that's run by the Big Ten Academic Alliance, and you can apply, and they will, you know, explain how you can, what different sites you can choose to apply to, and that application, if you go to the next point, please, it is coming up in the next couple months. So you actually do have some time to decide whether or not you want to apply. That application is due February 11th, but that's one good opportunity. Going to the next one. So the National Science Foundation, which is a federal agency, they offer something called the Research Experiences for Undergraduates program. So basically the way that works is they have many, many projects that they've already funded. So NSF has all of these different grantees. And what they've done is they've earmarked funds so that those projects can afford to bring on some undergraduate RAs. And so if you go to the REU website, you'll be able to browse the directory of the available projects. The different deadlines and application materials are going to vary by project. And then finally, the APA is the American Psychological Association. It's sort of the largest and most major professional association for psychologists. And they have a website that has a special part that's completely for undergraduate research opportunities. So it's kind of a directory. And so say for these two, there's plenty others. So if you spend some time on that website, you'll be able to kind of browse through and see if there's anything else available either in your area or just elsewhere, because many of these are not going to restrict applicants based on where you are enrolled at school. Michael, you are muted.
I guess that's where something I had to always remember. I can keep talking, but nobody can hear me. So we've actually compiled some information for both summer research and internship details on the link here. So you can easily scan this image QR code with your camera and it'll pull up the Google Sheet for you. I see some of you already filtering in, but this basically provides you both a tab for research and internship opportunities that gives you a reference for what the opportunity is, what the audience and the mission that it's intended for, specification regarding some minority requirements, citizenship, some other classifiers, as well as due dates and the range of the program. So some of these may vary substantially in the weeks or months that they're recruiting individuals for. Some may be very specific where their timelines are June to say August, which is specific to the summer here. And so we compiled both this QR code and the link here so you can reference this now and later. They'll be live moving forward. But they kind of compile a couple of the details that Lolita covered through her last slide. And so thus far, we kind of discussed where researchers perform. So there could be universities, it can be think tank, government agencies, other local facilities. And then we discussed kind of what applications may be for summer internships or research positions. So one part that may be important is to understand how you go from being curious to being hired. And in some cases, they'd be how do you even decide on what research you want to really focus on? What do you want to apply for and what direction you want to take in that application before you actually get interviewed and hired for that RA position. So we'll go over some of these steps in this process on the next slides. And so one important detail to consider is kind of like your interest and intended goal. And so if you think back to the paths that we presented earlier for the four of us, neither of the paths were identical. We had different variations that led us to a similar place. So they don't always have to be consistent. But it is kind of helpful to consider what your ultimate goal is, because that may actually prepare you differently for how you're going to get there. So whether you're in your first, second, third, or fourth year may kind of dictate how much time you have to experiment and apply for. And so those are the things you consider depending on where you're trying to get. And so you might want to ask yourself, are you interested in applying to grad school? And if you are you trying to apply primarily a master's program or a PhD program? Because both those might provide different kind of sets of skills that you might want to acquire or experience you might want to acquire. And also you want to ask whether or not you are interested in teaching or research altogether. And so research and teaching may be something you'll have to first get experience with, because you can't really know if you like or don't like something until you try it. And then another question, and this is something that I've experienced or experimented quite a bit through my kind of research track, is whether or not you want to work with people, animals, or some biological aspect. And so I've had the opportunity to work with both animals and human models, and I found to like both. But at the same time, I worked with individuals in the animal facilities who just found they did not want to work with animals ever again, or people found out they don't want to work with people ever again. And so that's an appropriate kind of interest and goal, but it's something that you kind of need to learn along the way so you can decide for yourself. And so it's always kind of important to consider what fits your current goals. And so sometimes these things can be clear, and other times they can be quite unclear. And so there's not really an issue if something is unclear, because if you're unsure of what you want to do specifically because you haven't had enough exposure to, say, a research area or particular topic, you want to learn more about it, you're kind of on the balance of whether you want to work with people or animals, you just kind of like both. This offers you an opportunity to kind of learn and decide based on coursework you've taken on topics, to then apply for opportunities that can expose you to different skills to then learn about your own interests. And so over time, this can actually funnel you into a goal that you'd like to end up to. So if you're trying to get into graduate school, but you're uncertain whether you want to work on brain development in animals or humans, but through some experience, you find out you really like working on topics that are related to the primate model, and that will actually funnel you in the right direction to those type of opportunities. While on the other hand, you can have a very clear and specific goal. So here I just use my biased example of getting into development psychology PhD program. And so you might consider a couple of topics that you're interested in. So, and these can be very specific, or these can be a little bit more broad to kind of allow you multiple opportunities that you can apply for later on. And when you consider these, you might consider labs that can fulfill those topics. And with those labs, you can build the necessary skills for the program you're trying to apply and retain good letters of reference, which are essential to conveying your both expertise and skill set and motivation in a topic that you're applying for, which we'll discuss a little bit more in detail later on. But the main point is you can have both clear and unclear kind of goals, and you can find out along the way what specifically you are going to end up doing later on. It's just the exposure and the opportunity to learn is what will allow you to eventually foster and develop that goal. And another point to consider is, and this is something I frequently heard, is fit. And I didn't really quite understand it until I spent more and more time in different type of opportunities. And it's just considering, how does what you're applying for, whether the topic, whether it's the lab, or whether broadly just the career trajectory in general, how does it fit what you're trying to do and what you actually enjoy? Because at the end of the day, we want to be able to do things that we enjoy day in or day out, because you're going to be spending quite a bit of time in a career. And so you want to make sure it fits your interests as well. And so when you consider labs, and this can occur when you're applying or when you're in the lab, you might want to consider the topics, the primary mentors, supervisors, their duties and commitments. And so in some cases, you might see a limitation in one or the other, and that may dictate whether or not that lab is good for you. So providing you an example from my own undergrad, there was a lab that had a topic that I was highly interested in. It was doing adolescent brain development. It was a primary mentors and supervisors were really good in the field, where I could learn from both the PI, who was very involved in the lab, and also graduate students who were very involved. And they allowed students to come in and learn, kind of participate in duties that will learn the whole process of, say, the fMRI pipeline. But the problem was the commitment that they required was 8 hours for 2 years, 8 hours a week for 2 years. And that at a time for me just didn't work. So I had to narrow my fit based on that commitment. So for you, that commitment may be less a problem, so you can maybe consider the topic. So if the topic matches your interests, you can then kind of facilitate by considering what your primary duties may be and who the supervisor may be, how much you can actually learn. And this may help you both narrow when you're somewhere or when you're planning to get to a lab. And I think this is kind of an important one, is and this is something you can decide when you're at a lab, is kind of the culture of a lab. And you can sometimes, this is a little bit harder to do with newer labs, is to see how many former undergrads they've had in the lab. This can dictate what kind of training they provide and how diverse type of personnel they kind of acquire. And also sometimes labs can offer journal clubs. And if labs offer journal clubs, it offers the opportunities for mentors and mentees to kind of like discuss topics at breadth that can improve graduate students trainings to try to mentor students, but also improves like junior research personnel. So this can be like undergrad RA who's a freshman and sophomore, to understand what do you look into when you read a paper? Should you pay attention to? How should you dissect it? What questions you should ask? And so this all relates to this whole concept of a lab that fosters developing your skills. And so we all want to make sure that RAs that we bring into a lab, that they become successful and they become good research, hopefully one day research investigators in the future, if that's what they're interested in. So culture is something is important to pay attention to, because it can make you really satisfied with your research trajectory, or it can leave a sour taste in your mouth, which make you a little sweat. So something you really want to tune into while you're going through the process and considering the fit. And then finally, and I think this boils down to anything we do ever in our lives, it's kind of mentorship, is opportunities to get mentored by senior RAs and our graduate students. And the great thing of most people might think senior RAs are undergrad students, so they can't really train you, but they've been through the pipelines. They started where you once were, and they are the most proximal to your current experience, and they could probably provide the most resources you in the immediate. Whereas graduate students who are in the trenches, working with the data, working with sometimes participants, depending on what university they're at, they can provide you some examples and mentorship for the next steps in your career trajectory, if you're interested, in fact, in, say, a master's program or a graduate program. Or they can actually kind of help you narrow down whether it's even a good idea for you. And so all three of these kind of aspects, the details, the culture, and mentorship, can really help you decide on whether a lab is a good fit for you or not, and how can it benefit you in the long run.
Alrighty, so you're at the point where you've narrowed down some different options. You found, maybe a few different projects that you want to pursue. A good first step to express your interest is by emailing the lab manager, the faculty member, the graduate student, or whomever is doing the research. And that information should be available either through the lab website or the online directory, or wherever you found the research project. There should be some name attached. So what are some of the features of an effective cold email? So the first is that you should not be wordy. No more than 4 to 5 sentences. So please be concise. And you have to remember that whoever you're emailing likely gets 25 to 40 emails every single day. So you want to make sure that you are going to hold your audience, right? And so absolutely no more than a paragraph, and even 2 to 3 sentences can sometimes be enough. So the second point, don't email with no knowledge of their work. This is your opportunity to show exactly what you know about the research, the topic that's central to the work, maybe some results of a relevant study. But your email should make clear that you have a basic understanding of the lab's central research topic or topics, or a study or two that have been performed there. So again, you want to show what you know. So third, don't be vague. Have a clear premise or ask. This is your forum to be clear that you are interested in becoming an RA for the lab. So you're not just emailing to say, hi, I love the work that you're doing. Make sure that they know that you are interested in becoming an RA. And then finally, don't be too casual or fail to address the recipient by name. So you always want to email an individual, right? So again, using wherever you found the project to find at least one name of someone who's attached to the project, if you're emailing like a general lab email. But it's always best to address the email to an individual and make sure to use titles. If you end up working with someone who is a faculty member, they will generally probably not have you refer to them as doctor or professor, but you're not at that point yet. So you always want to be more formal with someone that you haven't met yet. And then they will tell you later, if that relationship progresses professionally, they'll let you know how they should be addressed. Alrighty, so I am going to walk you through 2 examples of emails. And so this first one reads, "Hello, Dr. Block. I am a sophomore majoring in psychology with a minor in biological sciences. I read about your ACT lab, and I think the social desirability experiment on your website is very interesting. Are you currently accepting RAs? Please let me know the process involved with getting involved in your lab. I'm attaching my resume for your convenience. Thank you," and then a name. So this is a very good example of how to send a cold email to express interest. It hits every point on that previous slide. It's not too long. It addresses the recipient. The writer shows what they know about the lab, and they make a clear ask. So on the flip side, here's what not to do. "Hi, Sam. I've heard that it's good to get involved in research for anyone who might want to go to medical school. I'm a sophomore and I found your lab information through the psychology website. Can you tell me about your research? Do you think it's a worthwhile lab for undergraduates?" So this one has some issues. So the writer uses a first name for the recipient, and I advise against that, even if it's a graduate student, right? Maybe they don't have an official title yet, but it's still okay to use Mr. or Ms. in that case. There are some typos, as you all may or may not be able to see in the text. You know, the "I'm" isn't capitalized, the punctuation is incorrect. And then also, you want to make sure that you respect this person's time by doing your own research and making a clear ask about how to further this process. And specifically, you don't want to ask them to basically sell you, right? Don't ask them to share the merits of the lab. The last question, is it a worthwhile lab for undergraduates? You know, you don't want to have them make that evaluation. That's up to you. So this is your forum not to ask them to tell me about your lab, but rather you do your own research and you're approaching them, letting them know clearly, I am interested. What is the process? Are you accepting RAs? And then they also did not attach their resume as the other person did. So as you all can see, there's pretty big differences in terms of a good and a not so good way to express your interest.
All right, I remember to unmute myself. Success. All right, so a couple of things that you'll see in the application process or listings may relate to a resume or a curriculum type or CV. And so for most of you, you'll be usually working with a resume or submitting a resume. But I'm adding both of these on here because sometimes they might kind of say resume / CV. And so I'm just kind of providing a reference of what these may be and how they kind of differ. And so the resume, which you'll probably be submitting, is usually a document that is, you want to keep it to about 2 pages. You don't want it to make it lengthy. And then usually in this resume, you should provide some objective. And this usually kind of relates to kind of your goal or your interest. And I would tailor this to the goal of the posting that you're applying. So sometimes if it's just a generic lab that you're submitting this resume to, or it might be a specific volunteer or research opportunity you're applying for, they will have either things you can scrub from their webpage, the research they're doing, or the job posting or the volunteer posting itself. And you can link and match your objective to fit the two. And then you'll also include your education. And so for some of you, you might just be listing your undergrad. Some people will list their high school information, but it's not always necessary. And it's kind of vary from person to person for their preference. And also you want to consider what skills and competencies that you have that may be of value to the lab. And so for volunteer or research postings, they might specify what they would like or seek in their candidates. That sometimes can be working with Excel documents or proficient in Excel or Word, working with PowerPoint, working with some form of data collection, whether it's Qualtrics, REDCap. They will list it, and you should consider whether or not you can confidently say that you have some level of experience in it. And if you do, you would definitely should list that information on your resume in these skills, because it will allow them to first quickly glean from your resume that this person may have skills in an area that we're looking for. Other times you might just list things more broadly. So if you have any kind of exposure to a statistical software, this may be beneficial. And then you would list some professional work experience. And this doesn't always, when you're early on, you may not have research experience. And so you can list any kind of volunteer or work experience that you've professionally had in your kind of career to date. And so this wouldn't really specifically speak to your ability to work in a research program per se, but it'll at least say you have some skills that you were acquired interacting with individuals, teams, or in different environments that may be kind of valuable to the group themselves. And you'll want to kind of include a couple of bullets that will cover essential duties that you've done. And you don't want to kind of provide a block paragraphs, because most people won't be really reading the blocks. If the shorter and sweeter you can make things, the better. And also, if you have recognition and awards, always put those on, because those are easy ways to quickly summarize some achievements you've had. And I argue that everyone should recognize their own achievements if they've worked hard for them, and it's kind of important. Whereas that's kind of a brief description of this resume. The CV is kind of similar, but it's a more verbose version of a resume, where you kind of list more of your research related accomplishments, in addition to things such as education and some research experience, where you list some publications, your conference presentations, academic services that you've been kind of participating in. So this can be, say, you're involved in something with your department at your undergrad university, or memberships that you're involved in that can relate to some form of academic involvement. And so although these things differ, they're kind of comparable. One's just shorter than the other. And so early on, you'll just primarily focus on the resume until you have enough information that you can expand it to a CV. Oops. All right, so what are some do's of the application and resume? So kind of what Lolita mentioned earlier, and when you cold email or contact individuals, you really want to be clear and concise in your language. And so one way to do this is, if you're applying for an opportunity that you have some insights about, you might ask a friends or family member to read what you're kind of submitting to see if they understand it. Everyone has this problem, and their friends always find limitations or gaps. I'll give you my most recent one. When I try to put together my resume I always had a favorite word that I included, which was diverse. Diverse skills, diverse this, diverse that. And my friend asked me, what does diverse mean? It basically had no meaning in the sentence. And so that's an example of something your friends or your peers, you may in your head, it makes sense, kind of like it did to me, but to them, it doesn't really provide any clarity to what you're trying to put across. And then another point is, in your application, your resume, you kind of similar to your email, you want to tailor details of experience to the job posting. And so you don't want to just submit blanket applications for all opportunities, because people will see that, how does this person kind of fit my lab? And so if you can tailor it to the job posting, people can quickly map on to what you're interested in, what they're doing, and whether or not you'd be appropriate, without them having to kind of guess and figure out how this relates to what they've posted. And this kind of also is true for the objective statement. Make sure it's specific to the lab's focuses. And so they can quickly garner what is the fit between your interest and the lab's kind of position. Because if your objective is to learn more about primate research, but the lab's research is focused on cognitive processing in older adults, it'll be hard for them to kind of figure out what is it that you're applying for or what you're interested in. And sometimes you can even be made more vague, and you want to be specific and tailored as possible. And then there are a couple of ways you can align with the lab and what they're doing. And so one thing you can do, but it's advised not to with respect to current work, is referencing people's publications. And so publications take, so you can start an article today, submit it, and it won't be published 2 years from now. So publications from 2019 aren't always current of what the individual is doing, or even 2020, for instance. And so it's not always a good reflection of what a research lab might be focused in on at the time. So although the publications may provide you a good reference point of the broader interests and goals of the investigator or of a graduate student or postdoc, they aren't always what they're currently working on. So a good way to glean what they're currently working on is kind of reviewing the listings that they're posting, what they're interested in, if they're actually providing you an RA position or seeking an RA, or the lab pages. Most labs, if they invest in the lab pages and they like their lab pages, they usually update them or have someone update that information pretty frequently. And so it'll provide at least a more current version of what the labs may be focused on at the time. And one thing that I found that's always been helpful and provides a more current reflection of what at least faculty members are doing as far as research code is using something like the NIH reporter, which if you enter their name and their last name, it'll give you specifically what a funded grant they have on, which is exactly what the lab will be probably focused on at the time. They might have other side projects that they're focused on, but at least you can tailor specifically to something they're already doing on that you can start a conversation on, which is sometimes helpful because you'll have insights other people may not have already. Now, there are many things you don't want to do, and these will relate to some things we've listed earlier. There are more than just this, but we list a couple just here. And so one is when you submit materials and send emails without proofreading, make sure don't spell the names wrong or send the email to the wrong person. And since it's always nice to provide an example, I've done this. I contacted when I was applying to graduate school to see if an investigator was seeking students for the following year. I spelt her last name wrong. And lo and behold, she never got back to me. So it really does not help to misspell things, especially the names of people. So it's a easy thing to sometimes miss, especially like if you're just trying to put something together, and it's just good to slow down and make sure that information is proofread and accurate. And then, like mentioned before, when you're applying and you're providing an objective statement or writing an email, don't be vague and say, I love working with humans, and your kind of goal and objective, or why you're applying for the lab, or that you love psychology. Because it doesn't really provide them enough information, and a generic statement like I love psychology isn't enough to bring you up to the list, because hopefully everyone that emails us loves psychology. Otherwise, it's kind of, I'd be curious on why students are emailing me. And then propose learning with the lab. An issue of proposing learning what the lab isn't doing or is beyond their qualification. And it's kind of important to make sure that you have ambitious goals, but if those ambitious goals are beyond what the lab is doing, it may be hard for the lab to see how they can help you, because if most people recruit people, they want to provide you with the opportunity to learn, but they also don't want to prevent you from being able to learn what you're interested in. And so when you make a goal that's beyond what the lab is doing, or propose learning beyond what they're doing, it's hard for them to see how they can help you. And so sometimes they will not offer you an opportunity because they believe you might be better off suited looking for something else. And then finally, and this relates to every kind of application that involves a cover letter or a statement of purpose or a personal statement of any sort, is try to reduce being too personal. So, and I think this was mentioned during a previous workshop and session, and we just reiterate here, is being too personal doesn't necessarily help. And so if you say, I have suffered with depression, anxiety, which has made me very interested in field psychology, clinical psychology, this is a helpful experience to have, but it's not necessarily helpful in the application review process. And I remember when I was applying to graduate school, I thought, oh, I can add something similar. Fortunately, someone told me, it's like, you should probably tone that down, because for some people, depending on who's looking at the application, it may be more a concern or an alarm for something than kind of a benefit. And so you want to make sure you be cognizant of how personal you do get in these statements or in your application. And then now we'll kind of move into a typical steps in undergrad RA application process. And so below here, we provide a specific application. And the couple of slides that we'll review next, some of these are specific, but several will relate to external universities or application process as well. And so that's something to keep in mind. So the first application component, and this is a little bit more specific, but it also may relate to external universities as well, will relate to kind of demographic questions. So applications will somewhat ask applicants specific information about characteristics relating to citizenship. So whether you're a US citizen or an international student. They'll ask whether you're underrepresented, a part of an underrepresented group in the field. Whether you're a transfer student, so whether this could be transferring from community college, from a different university. They'll ask you about your current status, whether you're a freshman or a sophomore currently in your application cycle. And then they'll often ask you whether you're interested in graduate school. And this is kind of to glean of what kind of opportunities that you may qualify for and what they kind of provide you based on your current status, what is available, and your future goals.
Alrighty, so second, a big component is often asking for a transcript. So if you go into the next bullet point. So for the University of Michigan students, I really love that our system allows us to get access to those both official and unofficial electronic transcripts immediately. If you want a hard copy sent somewhere, that takes a few days, but you can hop on Wolverine Access right now and have a PDF, either the official or unofficial, right away. So that's awesome. It's going to vary by university, but if you are a student here, that's something helpful for you to know. So here's what they're trying to get at when they're looking for your transcript. They're wondering, what is your academic standing? What are your grades like? And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have, a 4.0, but generally speaking, it is going to work in your favor, to have at least a 3.0 and ideally even higher than that. They're also going to be using it to get a sense of your coursework and have you taken any relevant courses. This is important if you're applying to a program that, has some sort of personal statement that asks you to articulate your interests. And, maybe you mentioned having taken a certain class, but if your transcript doesn't reflect that, that could be something that gets you in trouble. So you do want to make sure to always be honest, but your transcripts will also be used to see, okay, well, what has the student taken, and how might these different classes they've taken, how might that have cultivated or nurtured their interests or given them new perspectives that would be helpful in their role as an RA. And then this final point, it's important to keep in mind that there are some programs that do have minimum GPA requirements. So, oftentimes it'll be maybe a 3.0. So yeah, this is just another incentive to, keep your grades as high as you can. Just do your absolute best, because when you are applying to programs that are somewhat competitive, this can be an easy way to sort of, peel off some of the potential candidates. So just some things to keep in mind. So moving on to the statement of interest. There generally is one if you're applying through a program, or as we have here at Michigan, an undergraduate psych research application. And this statement is really important. It will usually have a prompt, right? And the prompt will often be pretty general, but if it's not one statement, it might be a few sort of short answer questions that will also be fairly general. And when you're answering the question, describe your interest in this program and how does it connect to your future career goals, right? Let's say that's one of the prompts, as it often is. You really don't want to be vague. You want to make sure that whoever's reading that application understands that you're interested and excited about a specific research area or a lab that you're applying to, if you have to identify a lab, because that can boost your application. It shows that you're thoughtful, it shows that you've done the research. So take this opportunity to set yourself aside by saying, you know, I am really, really interested in cognitive development work around language processing. And, you know, it's okay to say how you nurtured or cultivated that interest, but it helps you. So don't be vague. Do definitely mention your relevant qualifications. This presentation is for exactly whoever you are, and that means you're an undergraduate, right, who probably has little to no research experience. So we do not expect you to have really sophisticated research skills. However, you probably have a lot of transferable skills, and you want to make sure that you hype those up, right? So whether that's a certain kind of computer program or even just the Microsoft Office suite, that's still going to help you. If you have good communication skills, if you're an organized person, if you have any experience with quantitative software, database management software, if you've been toying around, you know, with some coding skills, make sure that that shows up somewhere. If you have an opportunity to talk about those in the written statement, that certainly doesn't hurt you, but be clear that you do have some skills, because again, you don't need to have sophisticated skills with statistical analysis or using some of the really common sort of, you know, survey, electronic survey programming software that we use. We're not expecting that, but make sure that you do say, hey, this is what I have done. So third, don't be overly altruistic when you're talking about your future career goals or your plans, right? So statements like, I'm destined to help people, I'm going to change the world. That isn't to say that those aren't worthwhile goals, but they come off as a little unserious, because even if that is what you're trying to do, we still want to get a sense whenever, you know, we're weighing candidates for a lab. Okay, well, what concretely are you trying to do? That's of greater interest. And so just be clear about how this project or program that you're applying to, how it fits into your larger career goals, and stick with that rather than more broad, you know, overly altruistic statements. And finally, you do want to demonstrate your written communication skills by proofreading your statement. So we've talked about this multiple times, but it is so, so important. Even if you consider yourself a strong writer, even if you love English classes and writing is something that you're the best at the end of the day, every piece of writing that is in an academic or professional context needs to be proofread. So that means after writing it, even if you write it in one sitting, coming back to it later so you can read it with fresh eyes. If you have friends who are strong writers, enlist their help. Friends or family members or other people close to you, that's okay too. You can also use that sort of text to audio function in Microsoft Office. I use that all the time. The computer will read your words out loud to you, and you'll actually be able to hear as they read, oh, that sounds a little bit awkward there. And so just make sure that you are displaying that you have written communication skills by presenting the best possible statement that you can.
Another component of most applications consist of the letters of reference. And there's going to be 1, 2, or 3, depending on what you're applying to. And references generally should, or not generally, they should not be related to. So they should be someone that can demonstrate your social skills, maturity, motivation, or an ability to work independently. And so you can find these through, like if you're early on in your academic career, you haven't had much work experience, you can find this through a former instructor or a supervisor that can comment on your ability to work independently, your social skills, or your motivation. So it's not always that it has to be someone from a research track specifically. If you've ever had a job, those people can speak to a lot of things that will be related to working in lab. And so you should not discredit their ability to do so. but you want to make sure that the person can, in fact, speak to what you would like to. And sometimes what's beneficial is if you know you're applying to a specific research opportunity that would like to have certain skills, which they kind of list on their postings sometimes, you can ask some of your letters of reference if they can specifically talk to point A or point B. So that way they're not kind of guessing what they need to talk about, what the job expects. You kind of tailor your requests from them that could improve your reference that you'll get that will match what your application is for. And so, and these things can look very different from person to person, but more generally, people will read these to try to decide of like, what does this person like to work for or with? How do they follow through on things that they're expected to do? And so kind of they want to see what kind of member in the lab would you be based on past experiences that you had.
So Michael, can I jump in for a second?
Yep.
So just speaking as a faculty member, especially if you are asking your professor, and especially if it's a professor from a larger class who may know you more or less well, typically what I ask people to give me is a copy of their CV or resume. If they have a personal statement, like even if it's a draft that they're writing for the program, to give me that. And then either a paragraph that talks about how they think that their experience in the class, or if they're somebody in my lab who's applying for another position, how they think that their experience sort of fits with the program that they're applying to and what they're doing. And that just helps me write a much more personal and convincing letter than, yes, they got an A in my class and they came to office hours and they seem very smart. So if you were able to sort of give me more material as the instructor to help me write a better letter, I probably will. The other thing I will suggest is if you are applying to a lot of programs in particular, give them a Excel sheet or a Google sheet with all of the dates and the email links and so on. Anything that you can do to help us stay organized is always appreciated.
Alrighty, so the interview is usually the final component of a research application process. Sometimes if you're doing a very informal route, if you're just doing the cold email, reaching out, the faculty member, and you have a little back and forth, maybe you won't have an interview, but if you are going through some kind of formal program, you should certainly expect an interview. So the purpose of the interview is for you and the project manager, graduate student, faculty member, to learn more about each other and to get a better sense of who you as the applicant are. So you will also have the opportunity to learn more about the expectations regarding this particular position. And then you will have the opportunity to ask your own questions, which is really important. So for do's, first of all, you want to make sure that you practice. This is something that can be pretty overlooked actually, but practice. Even if the practice questions you come up with are easy, and if you are looking for ideas, you can certainly Google common interview questions, because the questions you will be asked are generally pretty common, pretty standard things, but you want to be prepared. And the best way to be prepared is to practice. So write down the questions, either write down your answers or record yourself answering and listen back, whatever you prefer. But you do want to make sure that you sound smooth and that, of course, that you're prepared. That will show that you're a conscientious student. You also want to come prepared with your own questions. This might be the most overlooked part of getting an interview when you're an undergraduate, because a lot of people don't emphasize this, but I want you all to walk away from this workshop with, if nothing else, the understanding that you aren't just being interviewed, you're also making an assessment. Questions are your way to make that assessment, right? If you're curious about, how much collaboration happens in the lab, for example, if you like working with other people on things, but you don't have a sense of how much that will come up in this position, ask that question. It's a good one. And don't be afraid to be taking notes when they're replying either. It doesn't look bad, right? They don't expect you to remember everything. So do come prepared with your own questions. You do want to spin those weaknesses into opportunities for growth or your specific plan on how to address that issue. A very common interview question is, what's a weakness or what's something that you've struggled with in the past with coursework or teamwork or motivating yourself individually. So you might get that question. And it is okay to, take the question seriously. Maybe there is something that's pretty big for you, right? Like if you struggle with time management, for example, it's okay to say, I have had issues managing my time and making sure I get everything done. But the way that I'm going to address that is I'm now using a planner, and I have a couple of apps that I use that give me reminders to make sure that I'm getting my assignments and things started at a certain period so everything can get done. That shows that you're thoughtful. I don't think it hurts you to be honest. And I also think that it's a way for the person who's interviewing you to really get to understand you better as a person. They don't expect you to be perfect, but you can be thoughtful with how you answer these questions. So connect those weaknesses to how you plan to address that issue. And then finally, you always want to follow up with a short thank you. Back in the day, I used to do actual thank you notes when I was an undergrad, but I think we, especially in this, very virtual world due to coronavirus, I think thank you emails are also perfectly appropriate. I recommend actually waiting a day or two, let them marinate, have some time away from you, and then you send that email and just thank them for their time, reiterate your interest and excitement for that project or program. You can even bring up something that you discussed, right, if you had a good conversation point. And of course, proofread the email. Use the titles that you've been instructed to use. If during the interview they told you to refer to them in a certain way, now it's okay to actually go ahead and follow that directive. If they say you can use my first name, go ahead and do that. Otherwise, stick to those proper professional titles. Alrighty, so we are going to close out the workshop by, or at least the prepared portion of the workshop, by talking about some additional aspects of looking for research opportunities that could be useful for you.
So I think this is where you guys wanted me to come in. All right, so I'm Cindy Lessig. I'm a faculty member who works with our amazing STAR mentors. And yeah, so as you all know, this year is a little bit different and strange because of COVID. And especially for those who want to do human subjects research, it has posed a lot of barriers and forced us to become very creative. Even for those who were doing animal research. So I know here at Michigan, we've gone back and forth in terms of, is it only seniors that can be allowed in the animal labs, or can anybody be allowed in after training? So you may need to be a little bit creative yourself. And also when you are applying to positions, you may want to encourage the person that you are applying to be creative as well. So for the most part, we're mostly either focusing on collecting data online or analyzing already collected data. So one of the things that means is that if you already have some experience either with analyzing data or with doing some programming or working with web design and so on, even in your first initial email, find a way to bring that up, because that is something that is likely to catch our attention. Anything that you can do, even if you've mostly been working, let's say in a retail outlet, but you help to organize the team and organize, a database of the sales and so on, bring that up, because you can talk about how that could then transfer over and apply. The other thing that you may want to do is just acknowledge up front that, I realize you may not have any positions open at this time, but if that's the case, I'm wondering, could I join in on your online lab meetings in the meantime? And do you have any suggestions for specific skills that I could build so that when you do have a position opens up, that I could be a strong candidate? And that's honestly what we've been doing for a lot of folks in our lab. We have probably about 5 undergraduates right now who are getting a great education by coming to our weekly lab meetings. And the ones that stick with that, we'll give them, little side tasks and things to learn along the line. And eventually, even if we are shut down for a while for still, in this case, the summer, they'll have picked up the skills to be able to actually begin participating more fully. And I think you guys already have a slide mentioning, so we have done a whole presentation on what to do if you can't find a research project this year. So I encourage you guys to check that one out as well. Go on to the next slide. Yep, here it is.
All right, thank you so much, Cindy. So we did put together, what are some tools or what are some ways you can kind of boost your resume and your candidacy for future positions if you're not having luck finding a position, either due to restrictions related to COVID or whatever else it may be. I'm gonna kind of share with you some different online resources for you to sort of build your skill set. So there are a bunch of things that you can look into if you're trying to gain some skills around data management and basic coding resources. So if you want to hit the next 3, yep. So here we have Coursera, which offers free online courses. They have all kinds of things. I've taken Coursera courses actually before I started my PhD, and they have specific classes for SPSS and plus other kinds of software to learn how to either use these different software, how to code. So it really just depends on what you're looking for. There are 2 others, and I've listed the website here for you if you're interested in learning the basics of R, which is an open source programming language. It's actually the one that I use and I really enjoy. But also they have a lot of resources around stats training as well. And then there's also this website that's super comprehensive. It has classes and all kinds of other things available online for learning Python. So that's a few. And then if you're interested in sort of boosting some of your knowledge around stats, there are a couple of really awesome channels, 3 Blue, 1 Brown, StatQuest. These are free and they're available to you. So take advantage of them. And then finally, it never helps for you to get involved with using some citation managers. These can be listed under your, sort of the technical skills section of your resume. So Zotero, Mendeley, EndNote. I believe Zotero is totally free to use. Mendeley and EndNote, I think that you do have to at least purchase the software or pay for them, but they are all citation managers, and we all absolutely use them as graduate students. Faculty members need to use them too, but even if you don't have to use them, again, if you get familiar with them, they can be, nice little feathers in your cap to put on your resume.
So one additional thing that's helpful to kind of understand is like, who are these researchers? And one opportunity to kind of get some of these details or kind of get a general understanding, and this may not be for every academic researcher that is out there, but at least those are participating, is academic Twitter can be your friend. And I've learned since I started participating about a year ago, that it can be actually really beneficial. And so academic Twitter provides you with opportunities to find, you can find the information through researchers' web page and see if they have a Twitter first. Some people will actually, in their slide decks, they'll share whether or not they do. They'll sometimes share it on their, at least one person at work shared it even on his CV. So there are different ways you can kind of find information about who has an academic Twitter, or you can just go on Twitter itself and search a person's name until something pops up. That's what I've been doing. And sometimes it works if there's not 30 James Bobs, but other times it can kind of, obviously be difficult. And then here you can kind of, once you connect with these people, you can find out who they follow, interact with. So that way you can kind of build your network. So early on, you might start off and know 1 or 2 people that do research on a specific topic, but the research community on topics is pretty large. I mean, conferences generally have thousands of people that attend, that hundreds focus on some kind of niche of topics. And so there are many people that you may be missing because you don't know who they are and what the broader community is. And sometimes in these cases, academic Twitter can provide that avenue to connect you and broaden your network of researchers that are doing topics that you're kind of hoping to get into. And one thing about this kind of platform is helpful is you are able to learn about kind of new research that's going on in your topic area. And I think every week I find 2 or 3 papers that I think might be interested to read on a topic that I'm focused on. I'm to that point where I can't use my computer anymore because I use my phone because their tabs get too long. So I use the tabs as something of reference to read later. So you just have like these never-ending tabs. But it's a really great opportunity to learn what is a new research that is going on. What are some papers that are important and what are some issues that are important that are circulating right now? So it can kind of develop your ideas and understanding of what important things are going on, which may be kind of useful to bring up during maybe a discussion with some faculty member or a research personnel that you may be interviewing if they bring something up, because you'll immediately know maybe what that paper was because you glanced at it. And this is your opportunity to kind of learn what those may be. And this is especially relevant with respect to, the last month when graduate applications going on, is there are frequent posts about opportunities from research staff. And this is RA positions, coordinator positions, lab manager positions. There have been countless of PhD opportunities that are posted on academic Twitter that people just share, and you can either contact them directly or email them specifically with questions, and they actually invite that on academic Twitter. So it kind of removes some of that anxiety by trying to find it yourself, because people here are inviting you to make it a little bit more informal in these cases. Granted, still follow the rules that Lolita mentioned, be professional, make sure you say Dr. So-and-so, but they are at least removing some of that anxiety as the guesswork of, is this person even interested in something? And just like a reminder, it's a very low stakes opportunity to network. You can be a fly on the wall where you just observe what is going on, who's publishing what, who's talking about what, or you can kind of be involved. And if you read a paper, comment about something, repost something, like something, just make sure to be professional, because these people obviously pay attention, and they may or may not be people that will then be reviewing applications on the road. So it's kind of crucial to be professional. And again, with examples, these are all valuable, and I've even personally benefited from academic Twitter. An opportunity that I would normally never think I'd qualify for, I was able to see one on there and apply for it, and it may or may not work out to my favor, but nonetheless, even in my career where I'm in my 4th year of my PhD program, I was able to benefit through academic Twitter by not being aware that was something that's going to be available. So whether you think you're too early or too late in the game, I don't think that's really true, because there's all sorts of things being shared and posted, and people just invite you to engage with them and apply to those things. And so if you can, I encourage you to try it out, and it might actually benefit you in the long run. And so I guess now we'll take any questions or comments that are remaining. I have not been following the chat, but I see like the red number, but there's several. So are there any remaining ones from the chat specifically, or should we navigate to the ones we've prepared?
I think we covered everything in the chat, and also I have just so just allow participants to unmute yourselves. If you have a question, feel free to just unmute yourself and ask.
So let me add just 2 more comments as well. So Michael, I was reminded of this by your mentioning of Twitter and other social media. The other thing that you should do when you are applying for programs is make sure that your social media presence is immaculate and professional. And if it is not, or if you have, as I say, friends you love but do not trust, then do make sure that you have everything set to private, because I can tell you, and I think the graduate students will probably echo this, the first thing that we do if you are a name that we do not recognize when you apply to the lab is we Google stalk you. And because that's just a very quick way to figure out you know, are there any immediate red flags there? You know, and what are we seeing? The other thing I was going to mention is also, you know, in terms of being especially creative this year, I want to echo back to what Tong and Michael had said about their sort of trajectories at the beginning, and encourage you to look outside of psychology departments. And again, I think that may be especially important this year, because faculty in psychology departments are going to tend to be overwhelmed with people applying to them. But there could be somebody over in psychiatry or in the med school who doesn't interact, or even in the business school, who doesn't interact with undergraduates nearly as much and who doesn't have the same kind of applications, but who's doing really similar research and would actually love to have somebody come along with them. The other thing I would say is, you know, this year, if you do end up, in particular, if you do end up taking a position where you're like, this is pretty good, but maybe it's not the perfect fit, or even if you mostly like what you're doing, but you feel like, okay, I feel like I'm being underutilized, I could be doing more. After you've been in the position for about a month or a half, ask to talk to potentially, you know, if it's a grad student who's your main supervisor, whoever your main sort of mentor in the lab is, and say you'd like to do a check-in, you know, both to see, you know, how they feel about how you're doing. And if they feel pretty good about it, and don't point out any areas where you need to improve, if there's something that you find really interesting and that you want to sort of work on and build your skills, mention that. Say, so I would really like to be able to work on developing my skills with data analysis and statistics. Is there a way that I can, you know, start shifting my responsibilities over to learn more about that and do more with that? And especially if you're somebody who's going to stay in the lab for a long time, we're very interested typically in helping you develop those skills, because that also helps you become more productive within the lab. So create opportunities for yourself as well.
Okay, so we just got another question in the chat. So what if a lab requires something like 1 or more years of commitment, but you don't know whether you'll like working there or not?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry. This is Tong. So one thing you can always try is try to connect with other, especially undergrad at the lab. Ask about their experience. How did they start? How do they like their experience at the lab? And if they think they're making a lot of progress, if they think they have, you know, like grown a lot as a scholar or as a researcher, and then make the decision. It's definitely fine to communicate with people in the lab before become officially a part of them.
Yeah, that's great. And I also think it's important to keep in mind too that sometimes things just happen, things come up. I think that you want to make sure that you approach this getting as much info as you can by talking about people, or talking to people involved in the lab. And then also maybe asking the manager, faculty member, grad student, whoever's running the lab, if it's okay if you maybe sit in on a meeting or two, right? Maybe you just need to get a sense of the vibe and a sense of the community and what that feels like. And often people will be amenable to that kind of thing. So yes, get the information that you need to get, because you don't want to sign up for something and maybe you'll quit.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, sort of make a judgment call too. You know, if you're at the, you know, point of, I'm not sure if this is, you know, if I'm going to be totally in love with this or not, but it's the opportunity that I have, that's one thing. But if you have that feeling in your gut of, I don't think I'm going to like this, you know, probably in that case, you're better off just sitting it out and working on some of those other skills that are in the other presentation that we mentioned. Because if you have a bad experience, you're probably not going to be making a good contribution to the lab. You're not going to get a good recommendation. It's actually going to end up shooting you in the foot. If you're just not sure, then, you know, you can try it. And usually, you know, as long as you sort of put in a good faith effort, again, you know, sort of after checking in, like after that month or a half or a couple months, If it's not working out and you're saying, look, I'm doing my best, I think you're doing your best, but maybe this isn't the best situation for either one of us. And you give them enough notice to find somebody else. Basically it's a matter of being considerate on both sides.
All right, well, since no other questions have come into the chat yet, do you all just kind of want to go through maybe a few of the FAQs?
Sure.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, so this is a big one of, you're interested, you want to have some sort of research experience, but you're really not sure about the specific topic. So first of all, I would say this is super normal, particularly if you're early in your undergrad career. And graduate students and professors don't expect you to know what you want to do for the rest of your life. I do find that it can be helpful just thinking about the things that interest you. So the classes you've taken, the topics or extracurriculars. And if you think about it, are there kind of themes in what you gravitate towards or find really interesting? Or even like if you go through a list, such as like on UROP or something of different labs, what are the ones that you kind of gravitate towards and think are really cool? And that may seem sort of self-explanatory, but I really encourage you to have that mindset and not the, which lab do you think will be the most prestigious or something like that. Like, I think pursuing opportunities that you're interested in will lead to other opportunities that you're also interested in. So that can be helpful. And later, like being able to articulate that if you do end up interviewing for a position, like why you are interested in that lab can be really helpful. So second, we talked a little bit about this already, but can I do research outside of my department or institution? Absolutely. So psychology is a very interdisciplinary field. And the questions you're interested in might kind of be at the intersection of two or more fields. So some institutions will have programs which will allow you to sort of design multidisciplinary research or topics. But yeah, as we were saying, it can be good to look at other departments at your own university, such as cognitive science, sociology, business, public policy. We talked a bit about that already. The one thing to keep in mind is if you are doing research for credits at your institution and you want to attribute those to your psych major requirement, make sure you check with your faculty advisor or chair just to see how the cross-department research credits work. And then lastly is whatever field you want to go into, it is important to have some familiarity with that specific topic. So if you are hoping to pursue something outside of psychology, make sure you have some exposure to that field or vice versa. So make sure you're taking relevant courses and talking to professors and connecting if you're not doing research directly in the field that you're interested in.
Okay, and then when is a good time to start? An easy answer will be as early as possible, but never too late. Because from the point of view of from lab perspective, they want to train undergraduates and just hope that they can work for a long time so they don't have to like keep training people waves and waves. But on the other hand, people really understand that some people take some time to figure out their interest in research, and some people even just take more time to realize that they are interested in research. So it is fine to like it's not like you apply as a junior and or as a senior and then your application is immediately reviewed in a negative way. Not necessarily like that. And there are a lot of students, undergrad students, who when they apply, they show the commitment that, hey, I'm even happy to work like the summer after my graduation, or like I'm thinking about doing a 1 year or 2 year or even a PhD program at this institute. So I think my graduation doesn't mean that that's the end of my commitment to the lab. And also finally, the last thing is, the most important thing is that every lab is looking for passion and commitment, not necessarily in terms of like hours that you have available, because you can have thousands of hours available technically and you don't use them very well, and that doesn't help you or the lab. And the last question is, okay, I do a lot of research, but what if I find that I'm no longer interested in academia later? The first thing is that you can always do research beyond academia. Another thing is that even out of the general area of research, skills are very transferable. If you are a good research assistant, then you will develop analytical skills and data science. And almost all lab has a collaborative manner of work. So you will be a good team worker, and you will be like managing a lot of projects at the same time. So those are all kind of skills that will be highly valued in like firms, NGO, or any kind of a career that you can think of. But one thing is that how you phrase your skills within lab and outside of lab will be a little bit different. So be careful about phrasing your skills in a more applicable way beyond immediate academia or research labs in your resume. May help you find more general jobs or career outside of labs. So I think that's everything I have. Okay. I just saw a new question. When is a good time and how to politely ask to pay if the lab manager PI don't mention it? So for my lab, the lab that I work at as undergrad, usually 2 times are a good time to talk about. First is before the beginning of semester, because usually if you are signing for credits, that's the time you sign up for that like undergraduate course, which will give you credit. But if you don't want to sign up for the course and want a payment, definitely want to make sure that you talk to your advisor or PI before that. Another possible time is right before summer. So like some labs will be more flexible with paying their research assistant during summer, but be upfront about it so that like they can think about if they have that budget or not.
All right, well, we are at 5:30, and so yeah, just to be respectful of your time, we are going to close the workshop, but we do just want to end with a note of, just remember no 2 paths are alike, and if it were easy, everyone would do it. So there are a lot of different ways for you to reach whatever your eventual career goal might be, and we hope that we've helped sort of illuminate some of those different possibilities. So thank you all so much for joining us today. You can feel free to get in touch with any feedback or questions at the email address on the screen, which is psychstarscholar@umich.edu. And of course, if you're interested in more information about our program, you can visit that QR code, and there's also the URL, which is at the bottom of the screen.
Thank you all so much. And I just want to remind everybody again, definitely check out that other QR coded link that Michael had put up earlier. We just barely touched on the opportunities both for students here at Michigan to either work at Michigan or elsewhere, but there are also at least 5 I can think of that allow students who are not at Michigan to come to Michigan for the summer or for even a longer period of time. And so we would love to see you here.